Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network. You can find us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party, Facebook / The Nerd Party, and on our website, thenerdparty.com. It's home to lots of amazing and different podcasts, so be sure to check them all out. But on this one, every 2 weeks, we look at the two films from the A24 filmography, and in this episode, we'll be discussing 20th Century Women and Trespass Against Us. And joining me, as always, is Dallas King. How are you, Dallas?
I'm very well this week. How are you?
Yeah, good. I'm really looking forward to this one. This is one of my favourite A24 films and one that's a bit of a first-time watch for me. So, yeah, a nice double pairing for this one.
Absolutely. They're actually both first-time watches for me. So.
Oh my god, I didn't realise that. But a scheduling conflict has stopped one of our guests for today's episode, Hannah Ryan, who's a writer for Screen Queens and Much Ado About Cinema, joining us. But we'll be joined later in the episode to get her thoughts on these films as well, so something to look forward to later on in the episode. But as always, me and Dallas will be covering A24 Hour News, and this week, the Midsummer's Director's Cut will be coming to America on August 30th, with an additional 30 minutes worth of material, with a focus apparently on some more cult rituals, Christian being even more of a dick, and fleshing out the relationship between him and Danny. So, no word on a UK release yet. We're sort of waiting for Entertainment One, really, to sort of take the lead on that one. And the Blu-ray in America currently does not come with the extended cut when that arrives in October time. So, Dallas, what are your thoughts on Midsummer, the Director's Cut? Have you read any of the articles in the past kind of week that have been dropping, sort of spilling the details and all the extra scenes?
I have to admit that, yes, I did read one of the articles. I couldn't help myself. And from what I saw, yeah, it's all looking rather positive. The film was nearly 3 hours long, but I think similar to Blade Runner 2049, this was a film which I could have easily watched about another hour of in one sitting. I thought there was definitely scope to build on certain aspects of it, especially the sort of history and the rituals behind the Swedish sort of family that they're staying with. So I'm looking forward to seeing the final thing. And yeah, more of Christian being a dick. I mean, he's a total dick in the film. So I'm going to be interested to see in which other ways he could be even more of a dick and make the audience hate him even more to justify that rather hideous ending that he meets.
Yeah, we've kind of got a second podcast called Filibuster that you can also check out on the Nerd Party, and we've already sort of covered Midsummer there. Obviously, it's going to still be a little while before we get round to that one on this podcast. But when we sort of discussed it on that other show, I was like, the guy really was a dickhead, terrible boyfriend, but he certainly didn't deserve that punishment that he got in terms of burning to death. And, we had an interesting sort of debate about that one. I'm kind of expecting that this sort of extended cut is going to sort of put that perhaps minor criticism that I had to one side and make sure that when I watch the end, I'm like, oh yeah, burn that guy, as opposed to, that seems really harsh. He was a terrible person, but he doesn't deserve to be burned. So I'm kind of definitely curious to check that one out.
Yeah, and I think it was Florence Pugh and Ari Aster apparently had different takes on the ending about whether or not Danny was in her total right mind at the time and was able to make the decision about what happened to Christian at the end. Some people say that, maybe she wasn't really sure what was happening, and some people said, oh no, she definitely picked that ending for him. And I think this will probably potentially lean rather drastically towards one interpretation of that ending as well, I think, by the time we get round to the end of it.
Yeah, are you frustrated that as I say, this episode kind of drops on the Monday, and Midsummer, the Director's Cut, will be out in a few days' time in America? There's no buzz or expectation that we're going to get it here in the UK, and there's obviously the Blu-ray is going to be coming without it as it stands. Are you sort of worried that we might not get the opportunity to see this Director's Cut?
It is a slight worry. I mean, there's no Blu-ray release date for the UK as far as I'm aware. You never know. By that time, they might decide to put the Director's Cut on that one. And then the Americans will be going, oh great, now I've got to import a region 2, Region B Blu-ray, all the way back over to the States. So that would be fun to get one up on them that way. But I think it is something that will. I think it did reasonably well at the UK box office. As well as a nearly 3-hour-long 18-rated horror film can do over the summer blockbuster season. And so I think there's potential for the odd, maybe like a one-off screening or very limited engagement run for it. So I think we will see it. London Film Festival's coming up. Who knows? Perhaps a special one-off screening there. I'm sure the press gang would happily queue up for a few hours at 7 in the morning on a weekday to watch this.
Oh, definitely. And I suppose it's still a kind of, by the time this episode drops, we'll be a few days away from the announcement of the London Film Festival, and we're certainly hoping for some A24 films there. I mean, I'm hoping crossing my fingers for The Lighthouse and The Last Black Man in San Francisco, neither of which have a UK release date yet. So I'm hoping those two films are going to be kind of getting showcased there. But I guess that'll be something we'll probably cover in a later episode.
Yeah, although I think that Last Black Man in San Francisco has been confirmed for the 25th of October now. I think Universal are going to be screening that one. So it should get a full cinema release. Whether or not they decide it's too close to the festival to feature in there, I don't know. But Uncut Gems is another one. I think that's screening at Toronto. So there's a chance for that one as well, perhaps as well.
Yeah, and we found out like The Souvenir finally has a UK release date. We'll have that in September as well. So yeah, it could be an exciting kind of month period for blitzing some of the A24 films that have been a bit slow to come to
I'm
the
sure
UK.
Film Twitter Girl will be all over it on her Twitter and Instagram feeds.
Absolutely, that's too close to life sometimes. But we've also got some news as well. So we announced in our last episode we had hopefully some further interviews that we could add to kind of the forthcoming ones we've already got, and we've got 2 interviews to announce. So we've got a small backlog of interviews to share first, but we can confirm that we're going to have episodes with Chris Burgock, who was the co-producer and co-writer of the Florida Project, and he joined us for about an hour-long plus conversation, which I'm really excited to share with you guys. And Guy Nativi, the writer and director of one of A24's latest films, Skin, and will be an Academy Award winner as well. He won for Best Short Film for the Skin as well, so he's someone that we'll be bringing in a couple weeks time as well, so something to stay tuned for on the podcast.
Absolutely. I've had a sneak peek of the interview you did with Chris, and it's definitely worth a listen to.
Yeah, it's like total A24 porn for those who are interested. And one of those things, we were a small preview before that, we were chatting about it, and I was like, oh, and obviously our podcast comes from sort of the idea of the Florida Project, and it's safe to say he never even clicked with that. And I often wonder how many of our audience members actually put that connection together, or if it's just someone like the writer himself, it just passes you by.
Yeah, well, I know it's one of those ones that you I almost kind of forget sometimes, because it is a project for us. There's up to, I think it's about 86 films now that we're needing to get through, so it can feel like a project sometimes. But yeah, no, it was definitely inspired by that, and also Ghost Story was clearly another inspiration for the artwork for the podcast. That was the only, because we couldn't find a shopping trolley to try and recreate that wonderful Florida Project poster ourselves in. So.
Definitely. And so next week we've got another interview to drop as well, and we're going to be joined by Patricia Rosema, the writer-director of Into the Forest. So that was one we recently kind of covered here on the podcast, and she's going to talk about the making of the film, her career as one of cinema's most prominent female directors, working with the Weinsteins and Miramax in the 90s, and much more, in sort of about a nearly 90-minute chat that could have gone on longer had it not been for life getting in the way. So here's a small preview of next week's bumper episode. I want to get your take on one thing that you touched on, Big Little Lies there, and sort of a fellow A24 filmmaker herself, Andrea Arnold. It's sort of broken in the news this week about sort of she's gone on and shot, the second season of this show. I love her work, like Red Road, American Honey, for example. She has such a great, unique style. And it's all come out this week that HBO and the editing team from that are taking what she's doing and twisting it into something completely different. Is that ever sort of a worry for you when you do these sorts of things? You describe it, it could almost be like the bus driver. And once you've done your job, what people can maybe do with sort of your your heart and soul, how you've shot things, how you've put things together. Has that ever been a worry for you? And do you feel that that's something that might put off directors like maybe yourself and Andrea and Arnold potentially doing television again in the future?
I walk into it with this knowledge that they're just going to cut it the way they want. There's a 3 or 4 days allowed for the quote director's cut, and then I don't think they actually really care particularly what you do, and then they make whatever they want from it. I walk in with my eyes open, which is why I say less stress, less reward. I think that situation is different because, Jean-Marc Vallée has done something very important for television series, at least, which is to really build up the concept of the auteur, TV director, or at least premium cable director. But so that's an exciting development. I think he's done a lot for that. Like, he goes in and he often rewrites, doesn't take credit, but or is involved very deeply in a restructuring of things. So I love his work. I've loved it from the beginning, and so I don't know what Andrea Arnold's work look like. I look at the show now and I love it. I can't wait to see next week. But I guess I just want to look at the contract. Did you have final cut or not? If you don't have final cut, you don't have final cut. I had final cut. I've had final cut on most things, but I get it on a percentage of the audience approval. So if I do a test screening and it's over a certain score, then I've got final cut. If it's under a certain score, then they can take it away. Yeah, kind of disgusting, but it's that other people, non-filmmakers, are deciding what the film should be. That's heartbreaking, but I'm also very aware that it's a business. So when I make something like Mouthpieces film you just saw, that's thrilling to me, because no one's gonna. There's never any tiny question whether I have final cut, and I keep the budget low, and but it doesn't go as far either. It doesn't go as far because it doesn't have movie stars in it, and it's so unique and strange. So the smaller the budget, the more freedom and the more control you have, and the bigger the budget, the more people you have to listen to. I've just always assumed that equation. So what am I saying? I'm saying I'd like to see Andrea Arnold's cut. I'd like to see that. So truly an artist. I don't know, whether her contract was violated. I don't know. I think what she told, you can do what you as an artist want to do, and then that was denied. Well, then that's the crime.
So yeah, look out for that episode next week. So you'll find it on all the places that you usually get this podcast in, and hopefully this is one you'll enjoy too.
Absolutely, I can't wait to hear the full thing.
So our first movie today is 20th Century Women. So set in Santa Barbara, the film follows Dorothea Fields, played by Annette Bening, a determined single mother in her mid-50s who is raising an adolescent son, Jamie, at a moment brimming with cultural change and rebellion. And the film also stars Elle Fanning, Greta Gerwig and Billy Crudup. So Dallas, you'd mentioned this was the first time that you'd seen this film. Like, this has been one that's sort of been buzzing around for a little while. People talk about this film quite a lot, especially film hipsters, that is. What did you expect going into this film, and what was your initial reaction after all these years?
It's weird because this is a film which, in retrospect, having now watched it, I have no idea why I had not seen it before. I mean, I was aware of it. I was aware that Annette Bening had been nominated for Golden Globe. I was aware of that he got an Oscar nomination for the screenplay, but I don't know, just for some reason or other, I guess, as you said, life finds a way of just other things take priority, and it just keeps falling down the list. And then when we started the project, I just decided to leave it until we we're coming up to it, I like to watch each film around about sort of the week in the run up to each episode, so it's sort of fresh in the mind. And yeah, I watched it and immediately have regretted the decision not to watch it until now, because it was absolutely fantastic. I think sort of 5-star film and easily the best new watch that I've had on this project so far. What about yourself? When did you first discover this film?
Yeah, I saw this one opening weekend. This was when I was really anticipating. I'd sort of Frances Ha was one of my kind of favourite films of that kind of time, and when this sort of film kind of began to be trailered, I was really quite keen to check it out. I thought it had a great cast. I liked Billy Crudup, Elle Fanning. I think this was in and around, or maybe just after the Neon Demon, so I was really keen to see some more from her. It just had a cast that had me really excited, and Santa Barbara's a place I've visited a couple of times as well and really love. So this was one, they had me. It couldn't have been more sort of tailor-made for me. And I remembered seeing it on I think it was like a Saturday afternoon, relatively busy screening, nothing to kind of write home about, and just falling in love with this film straight away. And it's been one, it's taken me a little while to get round to revisiting, but it was such a treat to watch it a few weeks ago again for the second time. I just think it's so well cast. I just really love a lot of things about this film, and I think this is definitely one of the top tier A24 films. So I'm really glad, but baffled at the same time it's taken you this long to see it. But finally, welcome to the club.
Yeah, no, I was leaving it thinking 20th Century Women was a sequel to Little Women, and I was waiting until Greta Gerwig's version was out before starting to watch it.
There's a double bill. Yeah, get on that. That's a blog article.
Absolutely. What immediately drew me to the film, I think, on first watch, was it felt very similar to one of my sort of favourite films, Almost Famous. This is basically a young man surrounded by women who feels the need to sort of break out and escape, and of course the fact that it stars Russell Hammond himself, Billy Crudup in it, was an easy sort of connection to make. And it was nice seeing him in a good meaty role like this after being wasted in the likes of Alien Covenant, where he makes some of the most stupid decisions in the history of movie making. I mean, it's clear that entire spaceship of people had never watched an Alien movie before.
Yeah, most definitely. I think like one of the highlights of this film is it is an ensemble film. We have Greta Gerwig, Billy Crudup, Annette Bening, Elle Fanning. What are some of the actors that stand out for you, and some of the performances or characters that you were really taken with?
I mean, immediately off the bat, Elle Fanning, I think, is one of the sort of finest young actresses around. I'm not sure if I'm retreading ground here, because I was thinking back to if I said this during the Ginger and Rosa episode, but I remember seeing her for like the first time. I think it was in Super 8, and there's a scene where she plays a young girl who gets cajoled into being in a short film that these guys are making, and she starts acting in the scene, and she is so good in that scene that not only do the people making the film get utterly bewitched by her performance, but the audience do as well. And it's like you were clearly watching a star being born at that moment. She was so good, and she's just been fantastic in like every single film since. Like you say, the Neon Demon, I thought she was absolutely sensational in, and yeah, just sort of in this role as well. She's just so good at being someone who is trying to be a good person, but obviously the nature of her relationship with the boy is very conflicted. She just wants to be friends. He wants something more, and she's like, by sleeping over sort of every night because she doesn't want to stay at home, she's clearly giving mixed signals, but she's kind of like in this place where she doesn't really think that she's doing anything wrong. But clearly for a young boy growing up, it's very sort of confusing, and that's probably one of the key relationships that I found really sort of at the heart of the film. Very fascinating. What about yourself?
Yeah, I really I like that it's one of these ones that in this sort of 2-hour film there is a lot of different relationships going on. It's not just Jamie's relationship with his mom, it's Jamie's relationship with the people around him, and then we perhaps have someone like Abbie's relationship with William, and how this sort of kind of gang all sort of live and operate in almost this sort of shared house. I found it quite a really interesting dynamics. Like, what was your feeling about sort of this unique relationship with Dorothea and her son Jamie? You know, Jamie is, you know, quite a young kid for someone in their mid-50s, and sort of her having that kind of cultural change of, don't you need a man to raise a man, and that she sort of is moving to more towards, like, what can all these strong women of different ages around my son help him grow? What did you sort of make of Annette Bening in this role? I thought she was just incredible.
Yeah, no, I thought she was absolutely superb in this, and she's an actress that I wish we sort of saw more of. You know, she was admittedly, you know, very good in a very small role in Captain Marvel, particularly in one scene where she discovers a Nirvana and a leather jacket. I thought she was just great in that, but this is one of her finest roles of the last few years. I thought she was utterly believable as this woman because not only is she struggling in her own life and struggling to sort of cope with the changes going on in her own son, but again, you know, similar to sort of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which we discussed on last week's filibuster, you know, the times they are changing as well. You know, it's set in sort of 1979, so sort of moving forward to the 80s here. So there's a huge period of change that going through in the world as well as herself and her son. And yeah, it's, you know, she doesn't have a man in her life, so she's wondering who can help raise this boy. And interestingly, she doesn't choose the sort of male character who's sort of hanging around, which is in Billy Crudup's character, but instead she asks the girls to do it, sort of Elle Fanning and Greta Gerwig, who I think is fantastic in this as well. She's got a really interesting role to play, and I didn't realise sort of going into the film, because I don't like to read much on the film sort of going in. I like to sort of be surprised. It wasn't until we sort of saw the sort of black and white photos and stuff and the sort of the narration of the characters' journeys to this point in the film that I realised that this was actually an autobiographical story. And I sort of would see these photos and wonder if they were the real photos or whether it was sort of stock images he'd found. So I found it really fascinating that this was a boy sort of telling his own sort of coming of age story, and now as a man looking back on it, giving everything that happens to the characters through the movie and also in the sort of epilogue as well.
Yeah, I think, like, talking of that kind of young boy that is obviously based on Mike Mills' experiences, Jamie, played by Lucas J. Zuman, he's someone that's had a bit of a quiet career, really. I thought he would be someone that would kind of explode on. He sort of appeared in some television before sort of 20th Century Women. He appeared in Sense8 with the Wachowskis, and following sort of 20th Century Women, he appeared in Thrill Ride and Sinister 2. And that's kind of been about it. There was apparently a teen rom-com called Every Day in 2018, but he's had quite a quiet career, and I thought he made quite a strong impression in this film. What was your interpretation of this sort of young man that's essentially a sort of our lead character into this world?
Yeah, no, I thought he was very good in it, and it, like you said, it is odd that he hasn't sort of gone on to do more, because, you know, he's someone that, you know, a few years ago he could have been the Timothée Chalamet of his day, really. You know, it's kind of similar perhaps to Almost Famous with sort of Patrick Fugit, who has been in some films but never had that sort of real breakout moment that you would have expected. And perhaps it was maybe being surrounded by, then this kind of feeds into the theme of the film, but being surrounded by so many sort of strong women, it's sort of, he was overshadowed by them in the release of the film and stuff like that, and maybe that's why he hasn't gone on to have the career that we might have expected. But I thought he did an excellent job in the film.
What did you make of Greta Gerwig? She's someone that we kind of touched on, and almost all the way back in episode 1, that it was close to being Frances Ha and The Place Between the Pines that were going to be the first A24 films, but fortunately they'd missed out. What did you make of Greta Gerwig's sort of first entry into sort of the A24 filmography, and something that she's going to be quite well associated with in a few years' time?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've always had a bit of a troubled history with Greta Gerwig, because the cinema I used to manage, the Belmont in Aberdeen, we would screen basically every single Greta Gerwig film, but what I found was that the audience was not really a fan of those films or of Greta Gerwig in particular. My wife hated Frances Ha, which is probably one reason why the two of you will never probably be able to get along and be best friends. But I've always found, I think Frances Ha was a film which grew on me on second viewing. I've found much more to appreciate it second time round. I did sort of initially wonder why I was against the sort of the whole sort of New York sort of hipster thing, but it has grown on me in time, and I thought this was quite a departure for her. She plays quite a different role to what a West Coast hipster, but there was just something about it, whether it was the fact, it wasn't just the fact that she'd dyed her hair and become a bit more of a punk rocker, but there was just more to it. It was more sort of grown up, more, you could tell the history of the character was there, and I found it a much more mature performance from her, perhaps, and it's certainly one of my favourite performances of her. But by this point, I'm standing now on the whole Gerwig thing, and be very looking forward to seeing what she does in the future, both in front of and behind the camera as well. What about yourself? Because I think we know your history with Gerwig, don't we?
Yeah, I really like her in this character. That one of my favourite scenes sort of in all 24 films is the scene as they're all around the dinner table, and they're continuing with these sort of women are going to be helping to raise Jamie in this weird kind of setup that they've got, and like she's talking about menstruating, and then she like gets everyone around the table to just say menstruating, and it's that cultural difference between someone like Dorothea, a more reserved generation. She's open, but certain things are kept private to themselves. And then you have sort of Greta Gerwig's character, just this up and coming woman. Like, yeah, I don't see why we can't talk about periods around the dinner table. Go on, Jamie, say menstruating. And I just really love that sort of dynamic in the film. And she's certainly, I like that contrast between sort of Dorothea and in particular sort of Greta Gerwig's character. I thought that worked really well. But I think there's two other another real character in this film, and that's Santa Barbara. So much of the interiors were shot in Los Angeles, only an hour and a bit away on the train, but Santa Barbara is, I consider, one of the characters in the film as well. What did you make of this location that they chose in just north of Los Angeles?
Yeah, no, I thought it was great. I thought the period detail was flawless. It was really felt in keeping with the time and stuff like that, and I thought it was just a really nice sort of calm, sort of peaceful place to grow up. But similar to, I guess, like you say, with Lady Bird as well, I thought was Gerwig clearly maybe picked up some tips from Mike Mills about use of location and stuff like that, and creating the sort of scene and history and stuff like that, and I thought it was great. And yeah, it's definitely somewhere where I mean, I've never made it out to LA yet, and as a fan of the movies, I feel I should do one day, but I think sort of taking a trip out the road to sort of Santa Barbara and then sort of wine country and something is definitely on my bucket list.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have been a couple times. My dad used to work out near Santa Barbara. He works in sort of the oil industry, and he was overseeing sort of a project out there in Santa Barbara. So I got to go over when I was 21 years old, which was just beautiful. And what I love about a place like Santa Barbara is that when you see it in this film, it kind of still looks like that. They have this deal where basically no building can be higher than 2 stories in Santa Barbara. So it keeps everything kind of, you have always these beautiful views out to the sea. It's just an incredible place. And a few years ago I was back out there again on sort of a tour of the West Coast, and like wine country is only like half an hour drive away. All the locations and spots of movies like Sideways are a stone's throw away from Santa Barbara. So it's just a beautiful place to revisit, and it's certainly on my agenda to get back out there again. It's just a beautiful and relaxed way of life out there, and I've always enjoyed my trips there. And I think the last time I went, it was just before sort of this film had come out, so I've not got sort of the opportunity to check out some of the locations used in the film. I've been on that beach. There's a picture of me there, but sort of before this film.
Yeah, no, it's definitely somewhere that I'd love to check out, and I would definitely try probably recreating some of the scenes in the films, as I'm prone to do. With Lego figures, I could make a Lego Greta Gerwig, I'm sure.
I'm sure you can get like a Lego plane as well that you can use for the final
yes.
shot.
Or, I mean, is there a Greta Gerwig Funko yet? Do we have a Greta Gerwig Funko Pop? We need one. Little Women will definitely get Funko Pops, I'm sure.
Yeah, the only A24 one we've still got is Black Phillip, so as it stands, he is the only one that's made it to plastic form. But
I do have that one.
yeah. You touched on it as well. This film's very much inspired by the writer and director Mike Mill's life, and that posed an interesting debate with me and my partner, where we were talking about this film, and her view was that this film explores feminism, but through the eyes of a young white man. How does that sort of sit with you? Is that actually just the reality? This is the story of that young white man, or is it sort of doing the feminism in this film a disservice that it's being sort of written and directed by a white man and told through a young man's eyes?
It's an interesting point, because up until I started watching the film, I'd always had in my head that the film 20th Century Women was directed by a woman. It had all these strong female characters who were written well, and I thought, oh, it's probably just, it must be directed by a woman. And then I was like, oh, right, okay, it's not. But I don't think it really does the film a disservice, because I think the writing is incredibly strong. The characters are three-dimensional, rounded, they seem very real. But again, it is his story, so these women are the versions of the people as seen through his eyes. So therefore, I guess it's totally fine for it to play out the way it does, and I don't think it does a disservice, because they all impart wisdom on him in some particular way. I think it's a great guy was Abbie. It sort of teaches him about life and music and stuff like that, and Elle Fanning's character, in one way or another, teaches him about love and relationships and stuff like that. So I think they all have lessons to give him, and they're giving him literature to read and stuff like that, and he clearly becomes much more open to the ideas of feminism, stuff like that. But I mean, people will say, I'm sure there will people say that it's not right, it should be written by a woman. But if it's his personal story, he's the only person who can tell that story, and I thought he did a great job.
Yeah, that was my feeling as well, that this is... I can imagine why people might be taken in by sort of the title, for example, and thinking, well, 20th Century Women, but who's the kind of potentially the lead character in this? Jamie, he's the leading character in this. He is sort of potentially pushing the story forward. But I'm the same as you. I feel that Jamie is that character, but we are seeing it, through his young eyes, and how influenced he is by the women in his life, and they're all great, well-written, cast and acted characters. And I just think, I will ultimately come down to, I can see why there might be a jar with the title, but ultimately it comes down to, I think it's Mike Mill's story, and I think he's written it the best way possible by writing to his experiences and paying tribute to those 20th century women that inspired him to become such a fantastic director. But this seems like a good way to segue into Hannah, and let's hear what Hannah had to say about the film. So Hannah, welcome to the A24 project. It's so great to have you on.
Yeah, it feels good to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
We mentioned sort of at the top of the show that you kind of write for Screen Queens and Much Ado About Cinema. Can you tell us sort of a little bit about yourself?
So I just graduated from Cardiff University in English Literature with History. I've been writing about film now since I was about 16. So the first site I actually wrote for was Screen Queens, who gave me my first kind of chance to get into writing about movies and film journalism. While I was at Cardiff, I was one of two film and television editors for Quench, which is their lifestyle magazine, and that was a really great time. So while I was at uni, I was kind of balancing those three publications at the same time, as well as each week we do a weekly radio show dedicated to film and television on the Cardiff University Students' Union radio station. So I've dedicated probably the past 4 or 5 years alongside my studies to film journalism and also cultural criticism. I like to write a lot about music when I'm not writing about film. I attend a lot of gigs. I've written about a lot of gigs on behalf of different publications. I'd probably call myself a sort of cultural critic, in terms of talking about film, television, music, theatre, and kind of not sticking to just one area. And I'm about to start my master's in magazine journalism, so that's me.
That's awesome. So kind of before we dive into 20th century women, I'm curious to get your take on sort of A24 themselves. What's your opinion on them?
So there's a great deal of A24 movies that I've just absolutely adored, and I really do still think I really think their magnum opus is probably Moonlight. To me, it's sort of the most essential film that they've ever put out there. And what I find so interesting about A24 is how they really riff on kind of the attention they get from young film fans, so kind of what we would call film Twitter. There's a lot of love for A24 out there, and I think A24 are incredibly intelligent in terms of their marketing and how they market their films to this audience. So I think whenever an A24 distributed film comes up, produced film comes up, you know that a great deal of, I would say, 18 to 30-year-olds are going to get out there and see it and give it money. I think it happened with Midsummer, it happened with Hereditary, it happened not so much with Moonlight. I think Moonlight, because that was such a big hit, I think that really kind of threw A24 into the open. Obviously, Moonlight was that surprise Best Picture winner with the whole mix-up and everything at the Oscars a couple of years ago. And after that, I think A24 kind of like skyrocketed. They also did Lean on Pete last year, which was one of my favourite movies of last year. I think they're brilliant at putting out this output that really does appeal to, like I said, this specific 18 to 30-year-old group of young film fans who are really getting now into serious film writing and serious film criticism. And I think it serves as a great vehicle for people that might have had like just, you know, a little attachment to movies, and they'd seen a couple of, you know, indie movies or something when they were teenagers, and then to finally kind of cross over and move into this new realm that A24 offers by working with directors such as Jenkins and Mike Mills. I think they offer this platform for young cinema fans, you know, cinema goers, to really involve themselves in something quite serious, and I think that's great.
What have been some, you've touched on a few there, sort of Moonlight, obviously 20th Century Women, which we're going to talk about today, and Lean on Pete. What have been some of the highlights for you, and what are some of the films that it's on your sort of A24 watch list that you're desperate to watch?
So I never have got round to watching Good Time, which I know is terrible because everyone talks about it and everyone talks about the Safdie brothers, and I know it's probably Robert Pattinson's performance peak, but I've watched the first 15 minutes of it, but then I totally missed it after that. And I just haven't kind of had the time to catch up on it. I still haven't seen High Life either, the Claire Denis feature that they released this year. Again, I missed that when that was in cinemas, and I haven't had a chance to find it online yet, but I'm sure I'll get there at some point. So those two are pretty high on my watch list, I'd say, as of yet. As for the others, I've watched a lot of them. The Florida Project is another favourite of my A24 movies, and that always sticks to my mind when I think about when I started to take film journalism quite seriously. So that would have been a couple of years ago. What was Florida Project, about 2 years ago? That was when I started to really think, okay, maybe I can do something with this with regards to a career or with freelancing. And Florida Project was one of the films that inspired me to move more into it. It was the first review I wrote for Much Ado About Cinema, so it's a big avenue for me. So I owe A24 quite a lot with regards to that. And yeah, there's still quite a few of their movies that I need to see. I also really love The Bling Ring, and I'm really glad that was shown recently on the A24 Public Access event that they put on, where they were putting on films like The Bling Ring and Lady Bird on billboards across the US. I thought that was really fascinating.
Here's two questions for you based on that. How have you managed to cope without seeing The Fuck Box, the most talked about A24 scene this year? Has that been nagging at you?
Yeah, honestly, especially because a few other friends from film criticism and stuff, they came to Birmingham a weekend ago, and we all kind of met up and had a few drinks, and obviously the conversation moved into A24 and it moved into Claire Denis, and I was absolutely kind of roasted by my friends for not having seen High Life yet, and they were talking about The Footbox, and everyone was talking about Juliette Binoche and Robert Pattinson, and I had no idea what was going on. I just felt totally out of the loop with it. It's killing me that I haven't seen it yet, but I feel like I need to dedicate time to it, and right now I don't have the time to do that.
And my second one, whenever you watch sort of Bling Ring or think about it, do you ever do sort of the Emma Watson, I just want to rob impression just spontaneously, or do you ever just randomly drop that in, or is that just me?
Always. No, I think it's really hard to watch or think about the Bling Ring without thinking about Emma Watson's performance and her accent, you know, especially when there's the scene where she comes out of the courtroom and she's talking to the cameras, and I can't remember exactly what she says, but everything is so well delivered in the Bling Ring. I think it's brilliant. I know some people weren't huge fans of it and weren't necessarily fans of Watson's performance, but I think it's a career peak for her. I think she's brilliant. I think,
yeah, I'm with you on that one. So kind of the one we're going to touch on today is sort of 20th century women. When did you sort of first see this film?
So I first caught 20th Century Women last summer, actually. So like I said, when I was at uni, I ran a film show with my friend Finn, who's a film critic too. He was just at this year's the student critic program for EIFF, which I thought was really cool. I was really pleased for him. And he and I would just talk about movies for 2 hours once a week, every Tuesday, I believe it was. And we had some regular guests on, and a couple of friends always joined us. And he was always talking up 20th Century Women. And I remember it specifically came about because he and I were talking about Call Me By Your Name, because this would have been... We first started talking about 20th Century Women in about January last year, so sort of after the Call Me By Name release in the November and, like, the talk about it. And we were talking about Timothée Chalamet, and we were talking about how he was, like, you know, the hottest thing going right now, basically. Everyone wanted him. He was in Lady Bird too. It was everywhere. And Finn said that Chalamet reminded him so much of Lucas Zimmerman from 20th Century Women. And I knew I still hadn't watched it yet. And I don't know how I hadn't watched it, because it had everything I wanted. It had Annette Bening, it had Elle Fanning, it had Greta Gerwig, and it had a Talking Heads soundtrack. So I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it yet. So Finn talked about 20th Century Women for a long time. And then finally last summer, I got around to seeing it. I sat down with a couple of my housemates one kind of warm evening sometime towards the end of the summer term, and we watched it, and I just totally fell in love. And I rewatched it recently again, and it's just the kind of film that I feel like I can put on at any time I'm feeling any kind of early 20s crisis, which I think can be said of most Greta Gerwig features, whether she wrote them or whether she's in them. But this one specifically, I think, brings me a real sense of comfort. So yeah, that's how I discovered 20th Century Women, was through my friend Finn, who co-hosts a radio show with me on film.
Did you have much kind of preconception going into it for the first time? Because I'd obviously been out for a little while by that stage, and I kind of posed this to Dallas. I was lucky enough to see it opening weekend, just by sort of, you know, chance really, and sort of Dallas, he's sort of waited on it for a little while till we got to this point, and obviously you caught it last year. It sort of feels like we're kind of at the peak of its buzz at the moment, but did you have much kind of preconceptions sort of going in, apart from it had sort of some enthusiastic fans?
Not really. Like, I'd seen sort of screen grabs of it on Twitter. I'd seen a couple of Instagram posts about it. Like, I knew sort of it was this story of about a small slice of a life and kind of a couple of intertwined lives. And I knew that people loved it, and I knew that people would turn into it all the time. And that's really all I knew about it. Again, I knew it was an A24 movie. I knew it was a Mike Mills movie. But that was about it, really. I didn't have any huge preconceived notions about it, and I'm kind of glad that I went into it without really knowing too much about it. I didn't really know what the plot was about. I just knew it had these incredible actresses in it, and that there was a young man at the centre of it, and I wanted to see what could be done with that. So yeah, no preconceptions really before seeing it.
The film was, I noticed, I think I remembered earlier this year, you tweeted out, like, what was your favourite film of each and every kind of year, the past sort of decade? And I'm always looking like, I wonder who I can get on in a future episode. And I noticed 20th Century Women was your best film of 2016. What was it about this film that kind of stuck with you over sort of the other films of that year, which was a pretty good year overall?
I think the thing about 20th Century Women is it just came to me at the exact right moment in my life. It is a coming-of-age story, and obviously there's a great deal of them, and it's an entire genre unto itself. But this one really specifically stuck with me, especially Gerwig's character, and also Fanning, not so much Fanning's character, but more Benning's character. I just think the way that these women come together to help guide this boy who doesn't know anything of the world yet, he doesn't, even though he thinks he does, to guide him and to give him everything was just so beautiful, and it's so emotionally intelligent. It's such mature filmmaking. And like I said, so it was 2016, so that was 3 years ago. So it was 3 years ago. So when it was made, I was about 19, maybe 20. When I saw it, I was either 20 or 21. I can't remember exactly which one I was, but it just felt like the perfect time. And it just seemed to speak to me in that moment. And even though it was set in a complete different time period, they're talking about the 70s and the end of punk, and, the incoming of Reagan and the eras of horror that were to come really under Reaganomics and the AIDS crisis and so on and so forth. Again, that felt like something I could relate to, in the sense that obviously we're undergoing a very unsure kind of political period over here in the UK. It's politics have been shaky and sort of unpredictable for the past 3 or so years, and it's the same kind of sense that you get in 20th Century Women, that maybe all these wonderful things that you experience when you're young and you experience as a teenager and you experience in your early 20s, maybe they're coming to an end, and that it's the end of a particular era. And that's certainly how I'm feeling at the minute with the end of my undergraduate time, and kind of I'm heading forwards now, towards the rest of my life. And Although I'm staying in the same place, I'm staying in Cardiff, everything's starting to change, and I know I won't be there probably for much longer than a year. And 20th Century Women just feels like comfort food to me. It just feels like something I can watch, and then I can kind of breathe a sigh of relief and be like, yeah, no, it will be fine. No matter how much I'm worrying right now, there's so much time, and it will be fine. And it just makes me wish I had Gerwig and Fanning and Benning around me sort of at the time to guide me as well. So yeah, it's a real important film in terms of my coming of age and my maturity and my kind of ascendance into adulthood. And yeah, I think that's what has made it stay with me so much, is that it feels so personal.
See that you were talking on there, the Jimmy Carter speech, the crisis of confidence speech.
Yes.
Where do you sort of fall down on that? Are you on the Annette Bening side thinking, this is like such a beautiful speech? Or are you thinking like, this guy's toast?
Probably this guy's toast, yeah. And whether that comes from the fact that I'm more aligned with Gerwig's characters and the character of Lucas Zimmerman than Benin, then not, I'm not sure. But yeah, this guy's toast, and it's kind of, it feels like the end of sort of everything. So yeah, I'd probably not side with Benin on that one. For the first time ever, I'm not siding with Annette Bening.
Talking of Annette Bening, what did you sort of make of her in this role and this character?
I think she gives a brilliant performance in this. I think she's so nuanced from start to finish. And I think what's so brilliant about Benin is there's such a softness with how she talks, so that even the most stinging words, the most effective, the most honest, the most serious words come across so in such a tender manner. And she's had that for as long as I've seen her on film, as long as I've seen her act. And I think this is a real career peak for her. I just think it's the perfect role. She inhabits it so well. And you know, the scenes where Jamie's kind of reading from her diary, and, you know, she's talking about how she's at the age where she's accepted to take people for what they are, which she didn't know at 20. That line really stuck with me. And when I rewatched it recently, it stuck with me even more, perhaps because of personal circumstance at the moment, and, you know, sort of going through my own experience with friendships and relationships. But, you know, the way she said, I've learned to accept people as what they are, you know, because when you're 20, I do think there's this temptation to sort of read between the lines with people, you know, to kind of say, well, maybe this isn't what they mean, maybe they're not saying what they mean. And what I love about Benin is, you know, she's talking about, she gets this age and she's like, people just are as they are. Like, when they show themselves to you, trust that that's who they are, trust that there's no hidden depth, trust that there's no hidden meaning which you're looking for when you're 20, because you're romantic and optimistic at 20 and you want to see the best in people. So yeah, Bennett's performance is really sublime. I think it's just beautiful, and she just gets everything absolutely right. It's the perfect tone, and I think it was perfect casting.
What about Elle Fanning and Greta Gerwig as Julie and Abbie? Two very different types of women. More perhaps the 20th century women than perhaps Annette Bening's. That was something a bit more relatable to us. What did you make of them as their in their roles and their involvement?
I think Gerwig's character is so interesting because it could have been an archetype. You know, she's got this short red hair and she's really cool and she does photographs and she's into punk music, and it so easily could have been this archetype that's kind of just used to sort of put men in their place, and that's kind of our only view of feminism within the film. But again, it's not. Again, it's measured and it's nuanced, and there's a lot of depth to it. And, you know, Gerwig has this incredible ability to be so sardonic and so sad at the same time. You know, we saw it in Frances Ha. We've seen it in Mistress America. It's there in all of the writing throughout Lady Bird. You know, Gerwig's characters and Gerwig's creations are so often very caustic, they're very dry, and we love them for it and we warm to them because of it. And then there's these tiny moments where they'll just let you peek inside and kind of see the sadness that's sort of lurking beneath, and you can even hear it in her voice. You know, I think she has that brilliant voice that it's sort of monotone to the extent that you think she's always mocking you, like she's always being sarcastic, she's always answering back, she's always witty, she's always got something to say in return, that really just masks this insecurity and this fear and this anxiety that's so universally felt. And that's what I think Gerwig gets exactly right with Abbie's character in 20th Century Women. And of course there's that brilliant scene at the dinner table where she encourages everyone to talk openly about menstruation, which I think is just great. And I love the way that it contrasts with Benin's character, because Benin, you know, posits herself as a feminist and she wants to raise her son in the feminist manner, and she wants to raise him to respect women and to love women, and yet she's uncomfortable when Abbie is talking about menstruation and her period. And it's this kind of two looks at feminism, and this split between second wave and third wave feminism is right there. You know, it's Abbie talking openly about her body and talking openly about, you know, its cycles, and she's stressing to Jamie that if he wants to have an adult relationship with a woman, then he needs to be able to talk about this. And Benning kind of saying that, yes, okay, like, we know it happens, we know you're a feminist, I'm a feminist too, but I don't want to hear about that. And I think it's such an interesting contrast, and it's what will make Jamie, who he'll grow up to be, is this mix of his mother's feminism and Abbie's feminism, which are two different perspectives on it that come together, I think, to still convey the point that, you know, it's women that should be listened to, that Jamie should listen to women, even if they feel differently about the same topic. He should still listen to what women have to say about the topic that affects them and that's about them. And I think Gerwig does a great job with that. And I know I went a little bit off tangent, then I didn't really talk about Fanning, but I'll come on to Fanning now.
I suppose that I'm going to follow up on that. Like, do you feel that something that's rare that we see in films is that you talk about different generations of feminism and the clash within that? That it seems in a lot of films, it seems to be it's one-note feminism, whether it's kind of modern or perhaps more traditional, different generations, that it's one or the other. There's very rarely that we get to see that conflict. And if a characters are described as feminists in a movie, they're all one type of feminist. Is that? Do you think that's a fair comment, or do you think 20th century women is actually a bit of an exception?
I do agree with you. Like, I think that's a fair position to have. Often when we talk feminism in film, it is this one-note feminism, and it's more often than not this modern feminism and these modern conceptions and what we've seen recently, if we want to call it fourth wave feminism. You don't really get much intergenerational discussion of feminism, which is why 20th century women sort of stands alone in that, because it's willing to put these women that have had different experiences in different eras and to have them talk about the differences of them, to have them talk about the contrast of these experiences and how it's made them who they are. And I think 20th century women is special for that, and you know, the entire title of the film alludes to it. You've also got Fanning, who's even younger than Gerwig, and her feminism and the feminism that she'll inhabit as she gets older. And I think that's part of what I love so much about 20th century women, is I love an intergenerational story, and I love that it is essentially an intergenerational story that centres around feminism, and it's something that we don't see very often, and it was totally refreshing, and yeah, it was great. I agree with you, totally.
You touched on Fanning as well. What did you make of her as sort of the younger woman in this 20th century women group?
So I think it came at an interesting time for Fanning, kind of at the peak of sort of her career thus far. I mean, I think she'd just done the Neon Demon. I'm not sure if the Neon Demon... Yes, I think she'd just done the Neon Demon. You know, Fanning is at this career peak, you know, where, again, she's at risk of being typecast, maybe, you know, as sort of a young, sort of startling, sort of femme fatale kind of character. And then what I love about her in 20th century women is that, again, like Gerwig's character, there's a hidden nuance and there's a hidden depth to it. You know, she rightfully calls Jamie out at one point. I think she says to him, like, are you just being nice to me so that you can sleep with me because you assume that you can because other men sleep with me? And I think that's such an important conversation to have, to kind of call out people's niceness, you know, when they're even when they're the best people. So like Jamie's such a good character, you know, and he's posited as a good person and a kind person, and yet still perhaps there's this other side to him that wants to be nice to Julie in order to sleep with her because he loves her, not necessarily in a seedy manner, but because he loves her, because he's always looking for something romantic with her, perhaps not under the guise of friendship, but like it's there even in the friendship. And I love that she calls him out on that, and even though he's very deeply in love with her, you know, it never really happens. She maintains sort of throughout the film that sleeping with him would damage their friendship, and then obviously she could have been this manic pixie dream girl that Jamie idolizes and idealizes, but I think the fact that she's able to call him out on his views or what he sort of wants ultimately is so important. I think it really, you know, subverts that manic pixie dream role that she could have been in danger of being typecast as. So yeah, I love Fanning's performance in this. Again, I think for all the actresses in this film, I think 20th Century Women is a career highlight for all of them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you here, and I think one thing, I suppose now it feels bad to go like now onto the men. What's your take on sort of Billy Crudup and Lucas Jade Zuman as Jamie Fields and William kind of respectively?
They're both brilliant, especially Lucas Jade Zuman is so... he's just got this innocent little face, you know, and his eyes just look like butter wouldn't melt, and he's so great at playing Jamie who's so confused, and Jamie who's going through so much and who's being told so many things by so many different people, and who has to live up to the expectations of his mother, which, as much as she loves him, she also expects the world of him, and she wants the world of him, and she wants him to be everything, for example, that his father couldn't be. And he really struggles under the weight of that, and he really struggles to live up to the incredible women around him. And I think Lucas J. Zimmerman gets it exactly right. I think he's perfect in that. And he has the perfect little face. He looks so young, and he just looks like this little boy lost in this crowd of older women who are kind of schooling him on feminism and schooling him on relationships and matters of the heart, and he's taking it all in, and you see him in every minute as if he's absorbing everything around him, and he plays it so well on his face, and he's brilliant. And I hope only to see more things from him in the future, because I'm not sure what he's been in since. I feel like I did look it up recently, but I can't remember right now. But yeah, he's great, and to be so young and to display such emotional maturity is a huge achievement. And Billy Crudup as Willem is just great. You know, like I said, obviously this is a film totally dominated by women, and the women do steal every scene they're in, but there's a lot to be said for Crudup, who's, again, his performance is so mature. There's this lovely scene where Benin's character is describing him, and she's talking about how he only ever knew engines. You know, they just made sense to him, and he couldn't afford college. And it's so lovely. That's what I love so much about 20th century women, is the way portrays characters in these little snapshots of their life. You know, it kind of, in about 2 minutes, talks us through their birth right up until where they are now. And Crudup as William is so brilliant, and you know, he's in quite a sticky situation. He's obviously involved with Annette Bening, he's also involved with Greta Gerwig, and he kind of has this interesting role of being the only sort of male figure for young Jamie to kind of talk to, you know, in this world full of women. And I think he gets it just right. Again, I think the men are great in this. I think there's a lot to be said for the future of Lucas Jade and where he's going to go. And Crudup is just as brilliant as he should be, and I think he plays it perfectly. And I think I loved seeing him in this kind of, not love triangle with Gerwig and Bening, but also an emotional triangle, let's call it. So yeah, the men in this are great too.
I forget that, like, the exact line, but I love that moment with him and Abbie, where she's trying to open up to him, and she's like, yeah, I just feel kind of really sad and down, and he's just got that otherworldly calm presence where he just goes, I know, and I think that is just so pitch perfect. He's just got something which is hard to do. Like, it's almost the same when, as you touch on Abbie, like, it could be such a one-note character, but
yeah,
he just
definitely
has this lived-in experience that he is just so empathetic, and he doesn't even need to try.
Yeah, no, 1,000%, you're absolutely right. Totally agree with you.
So me and Dallas were kind of debating this. It was sort of generated by a conversation I had with my girlfriend when I introduced her to the film for the first time recently, where she was like, we were watching the film, and she was like, this is the story of kind of, you know, I kind of described it, I thought it was a very feminist film, and she went, this is the story of feminism and feminists told through the eyes of a white boy written by a white man. But for me and Dallas, and I'm not sure about you, our view was more, well, this is a story kind of written by Mike Mills. It's semi-autobiographical, and it pays tribute to the strong women around him. What's your take on that? Do you think when you read 20th Century Women, you think the film is really going to be pushing kind of the female characters, less so the young white guy that's learning his way through from these women?
I'm inclined to agree with you. I think all Jamie really is essentially a vehicle for the views of Gerwig's character, Bennett's character, Fannon's character, to be conveyed, essentially. Like, all he is an amalgamation of these women. So yes, he's a white guy talking about feminism, but it's not that he's just talking about something that he maybe doesn't have any idea about. It's his lived experience. It's what he's lived with. It's what he was raised with. And I think there's something really beautiful about it, that, you know, we know that men are more often than not allowed to tell women's stories more than women are. But I think that, you know, it's like you said, it's semi-autobiographical by Mike Mills, and I think it's beautiful. I think that it's important to say, you know, maybe there are problems with this. For example, it's not particularly diverse, it's not particularly intersectional. Obviously, you know, there's not much discussion of anything other really than heterosexuality or ethnic minority characters. But then equally with that, it was the feminism that Mills knew in his own life. It was the personal feminism that he came into contact with, and I think that he does with it what he can. Like, I don't think he positions himself as this great feminist scholar, or that he says that it's all about me, this is how I feel about women's topics. I think he lets the women speak for themselves and speak through him in his film. And, you know, one of the main things about the movie is that Jamie just sits and listens and absorbs what they have to say. The women dominate the dialogue. For example, even when he's reading his mother's diary, it's her words. They're just being conveyed through him. That's all it is. They're being transmitted through him. He's just a vehicle. He's a carrier for the thoughts of the women around him. So I understand why people might think that maybe it sort of lacks a little bit of progress in that sense, but I'm more inclined to agree with you and agree that this is this lovely piece by Mike Mills on his own experience of feminism from the women that raised him and the women that are around him. And I think there's a case for comparison there with Guadon's Roma and his kind of discussions of feminism and how it came from the feminism of the women he knew and the women he lived with. And I think that could make for a really separate, interesting conversation about semi-autobiographical films and how we talk about our own experiences and how men convey their experiences with women, when they're talking about their own lives. And I think that's something interesting that could be discussed another day, or perhaps an essay could be made of with that. But yeah, I would be inclined to agree with you the most.
Yeah, so kind of what do you think the sort of film's kind of legacy kind of has become, that it's achieved cult status in quite a short period of time? Where do you sort of think this film has kind of landed in the minds of perhaps film fans, but also perhaps those that are looking for female representation on the screen and in terms of characters?
I think it's quite a surprise for those looking for female representation on screen. Like, perhaps if people were to ask someone, what are the essential feminist movies, people might look to directors. If we're talking about the past, then we might look to directors like Chantal Akerman, we might look to Varda, we might look to Denis, which are all wonderful completely within their own right, and obviously incredibly different genres. I mean, they're all foreign language filmmakers. But if we're talking kind of about English language film and English language feminist cinema, then maybe a lot of people wouldn't consider 20th Century Women, perhaps because it is written by a man and it is essentially told through the eyes of a, like, as was said, like a young white boy. But I really do think it's one of the most vital feminist films of certainly the past decade. And part of the reason that it is one of those is because it's not a film like Zero Dark 30, which is essentially about a woman being powerful. Like, I've seen a great deal of films about women being powerful. I know that women can be powerful. What I want is the nuances of women. What I want is just women's lives portrayed on screen for all they are, warts and all. And that's what 20th Century Women get so right. And that's why I find it so comforting, because it feels like a reflection of myself and my friends. When I'm watching these films and I'm watching Gerwig talk at the dinner table, it reminds me of my friends and I, and how we'll talk to the men around us and how we'll discuss our experiences of our menstrual cycles or so on and so forth. And that's what I like so much about 20th Century Women, is that it doesn't kind of perform to this expectation of feminism that we've perhaps come to consider, that women must be powerful, women must be strong, and that's how they must be portrayed. It's okay for women to be portrayed the way Fanning is portrayed or the way Benning is portrayed, because they're flawed. And especially Benning, she, like I said before, she clashes with Gerwig on the matter of feminism. Does that make her a poor female representative? I don't think so. I just think it makes her a human, just the way men are portrayed, and that she's allowed to have failings, and that she's allowed to be fallible. And for that, I think it's a vital feminist movie, if we're talking particularly about the past 10 years. Do
you think we've progressed as a society? That you're talking there, that take that dinner table scene, you see it in this movie, that's how it's portrayed, and we'll take Mike Mills' kind of description of it as that's maybe something that exactly happened. Do you feel that sort of when you have those kind of conversations around the dinner table, that society, men, women have kind of progressed, or is it very much that's perhaps, it's not changed at all from what we see in the film?
I do think we've changed to a certain extent. I think we're feeling more comfortable as time goes by of having these conversations like the one at the dinner table. And I think men certainly in the 21st century, I guess we're talking about 21st century women now, they're more comfortable having these conversations, or at least we're getting to the point where they're more comfortable thinking about having these conversations. And I think the era of social media, the era of Twitter feminism, the era of feminism on Facebook, and the era of much more accessible feminism. So in 20th Century Women, Jamie has to read books. They have to be the books that Abbie gives him or that his mother gives him. He doesn't have to seek these out for himself, because thankfully he's raised by women who care deeply about this. But now we're in such an accessible era where if men want to, they can simply go online and read about how women feel about discussions of menstruation, or how they feel about particular laws or certain aspects of politics. So I do think we're getting to the point where those conversations are becoming more comfortable because there's more access to them and they are being normalised. And I do think the generation perhaps below mine, so the current kind of, 13 to 18-year-olds, certainly they're growing up with this. They're growing up with this normalised feminism, feminism being something that's not a dirty word, something that's discussed on a daily basis. And, they're seeing more women in politics and because there's more of them, it's not just like a standout woman anymore. It's not like we just have RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You're seeing women dominate politics in the US and dominate them in the UK as well. Whether that's for better or for worse, depends on kind of whether people come down on the left or the right, however they stand politically. You're seeing this huge increase in women in these positions, and so I do think that we have progressed as a society. I still think there's a lot to be left desired, especially over in the US. But if we're talking purely kind of about Western views on feminism, those conversations are changing, those conversations are becoming normalised, and I do feel positive and hopeful about the future, because I think we've seen so much change since the setting of 20th century women, and I can only imagine more change is to come.
One of my things I want to ask you about was that you mentioned at the thing, one of the things that attracted you to this film wasn't the cast or the story, but was the soundtrack. What did you make of it, and what are some of your highlights?
So I think my main highlight would have to be the Talking Heads, The Big Country. It's so brilliant. I think it's that scene where Benen's character is dancing with Crudup's character, and it's so lovely, and it's such a great song. And I've always liked Talking Heads, kind of for a long time, and so much of this film, centers around them. There's constant discussion of them, and I love the fact that they set the soundtrack. I think it's perfect. I think it's clear that they were a huge part of Mills's life, a huge part of his teenage years. And I think when we talk about music, it's important to think about what we grew up with, and it's important to think about what came with us as we came of age, and what kind of music accompanied us through the most formative years of our life. And you always remember that music. As much as you remember music as an adult, I think the music perhaps that sticks with you the most is that which helped you through your teenage years, which helped you through the years that came before becoming an adult, because you remember so much change, you associate so much change with them, you associate so much growth with them. And that's why Talking Heads works so well in this film, because this is essentially the soundtrack to Jamie's life, and that it was inspired by the women around him. And I love the callbacks to the vinyls. Like, I love vinyl, and I love to see it on a screen. I think it's great seeing it in film, and that's what's so great about 20th Century Women. It has this real authentic feel. Like, I didn't once sort of doubt that I really was in the 70s and I really was in this 70s setting. It doesn't feel like a film made in 2016 about the 70s. It just feels like a film about the 70s, and it gets everything right with regards to interior decoration, and especially, like I said, with music and with the vinyls. And the Talking Head soundtrack is brilliant, and I just love the punk gigs they go to, because I would have loved to have been alive for that. And I think it gets the era right, and you can just really feel that this era was so important to Mills and so important to his formative years, and that really kind of drips off the screen.
Do you feel inspired to head out to Santa Barbara after watching a film like this?
I really do, honestly.
And we've mentioned some of the scenes that we consider highlights. What are some of the scenes and other scenes in this film that are highlights for you, or little moments that just have really stuck with you?
I think any moment that Abbie's talking to Jamie has stuck with me. There's a wonderful scene, and it's only a couple of minutes long, and she sits with him and she just says, however you think your life is going to be, I just want you to know that it's never going to be like that. It's not going to be anything like you thought. And it's such an obvious line, but it's so brilliant, and she just says it with such kind of this monotonous sort of confidence. Like, she knows, like, she's not messing around. She's not saying what Jamie wants to hear. She's not going to tell him that his life is going to be this great huge thing, that everything he wants it to be, it will never be that. And that probably is my favourite scene in all of the film, because it's so small. And Abbie, I think, is probably my favourite character in the whole film, and I think in many ways she's Jamie's favourite, not character, but she's Jamie's favourite person, apart from his mother. I think he connects with her the most, even more than he connects with Julie, though not in a romantic manner. And when she says that, it's just not going to be what you think. It's and in that, again, you see Gerwig's characters, and it's what Gerwig is so brilliant at. It's what Gerwig is so well known for. It is this kind of existential youth, and this idea that no matter what plans we make, no matter what we think things are going to be like, no matter how we think they're going to turn out, they're not going to be anything like that. And it's, like I said, she says it in a couple of seconds maybe, and it's stuck with me ever since.
I think we obviously this is the A24 project, but I think we've got to view sort of the fuller kind of picture with a film like this, that Annapurna were the ones that produced this film, staked the money in it. A24 saw it was great, picked up the distribution rights and sort of ran with it. Obviously Annapurna are having their problems at the moment. What's your take on them sort of as a journalist and a film fan about their successes, maybe where they've gone wrong, and their kind of current situation?
So I'm very, very sad to sort of hear the news about Annapurna, because I think they've done such great things. Sorry to bother you. I think they're really committed to genuine independent filmmaking. It's not, I don't think it's been about finance very much with Annapurna. Perhaps that's sort of what's led to the current situation they're in. I mean, I hope that they're going to come out of this situation, because they are wonderful and I want to see more from them. I'm a big fan of Annapurna. I've really enjoyed everything that they financed so far, and I think they've made very brave decisions. Like Sorry to Bother You was kind of so out of left field, and it was great to see them pick that up. And it was lovely that 20th Century Women perhaps wouldn't have gotten to A24 if it weren't for Annapurna. So I'm really sad to kind of hear the news about them, and I really hope that they get out of it soon, because I want to see more from them, and I trust the kind of thing that they want to finance. I trust their vision, and I really hope to see more. I hope they get out of this trouble as soon as possible. I
suppose the joy of being bankrolled by sort of dad's money, as it were, it seems that it's going to kind of bail them out as well. It just feels like they've done so many kind of great films, but sort of them going into kind of distribution seems to have kind of hit a bit of a problem for them. I mean, you think of some of the budgets that they spent, some films that they spent on, it just seems that maybe they need to have that little realignment and think about the films like, say, whether it's the Spring Breakers or the 20th Century Women that brought them some success, that kind of low risk investment that perhaps pays off over time. I don't think 20th Century Women made that much at the cinema really, but has kind of gone on to made a bit of a steady success.
I think might see the same thing with Booksmart. Was one of their features from this year, which didn't make a huge box office impact, didn't make a big dent, but was so widely loved within the circles of film Twitter and outside of it. I went to see it with about 6 or 7 friends at uni who aren't really into movies. They enjoy movies, they like to come to the cinema, but they're not into it in the way you and I and Dallas and the way we might discuss films, and they loved Booksmart, and I think it will go on again to gain not so much a cult reputation, but it will gain huge popularity, and I think it will be kind of honoured in years to come. I think people will talk about it as an essential sort of teen comedy, and one of the best of recent years. We had that wonderful kind of peak of teen comedies in the early 2000s. We had Bring It On, we had Mean Girls. In the 90s we'd had Clueless, and in the 2010s, I'm not sure what we label this decade as, thus far there's been some great stuff, but Booksmart was one of my highlights. And I think you're right, if Annapurna can keep investing in films like that, these sort of low budget, if they can invest in that, and because I know they did Vice as well this year, so they have invested in some of the big hitters, the big Oscar baiters. I think they're going to be better off if they steer away from Oscar bait and they steer much more towards 20th Century Women and Her and Phantom Thread, and I kind of put that sort of film, put that sort of authentic filmmaking above all else.
I suppose the one thing as well, like 20th Century Women was kind of nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay at the Oscars, which was a bit surprised, because I remembered at the time thinking this is a film a lot of people have slept on, so even to get that sort of small nomination seemed kind of a nice one, even though it deserved a hell of a lot more nominations. And I suppose just sort of kind of a final question really, any sort of kind of final thoughts on 20th Century Women and sort of its perhaps impact on you, or anything you want to kind of say?
I think final thought is that, like I said before, I think it's an essential feminist film, particularly within the past decade, and anyone that wants to catch up on feminist cinema from the 2010s should look to 20th Century Women first. I think it's an incredible showcase for the talents of all actors involved, and especially the women. I mean, we've always known how great Annette Bening can be. We've seen her act for years, but again, I think this is a massive highlight for her. This was a small film for her to take in comparison to the kind of box office pull she has. And I love that she did that. I love that she did this film for the love of the role, and I think I can't imagine anyone else in her role. Again, if you want to see Pete Gerwig and Pete Fanning, they're both right there in this film. It's almost the perfect sort of 2010s film, actually, if you think about the cast and the themes. While it's set in the 70s and it's about 70s themes of feminism, I feel like it translates so well into the past decade, and I think, again, it captures that perfect existential 20s feeling that you get in Gerwig's of the films, and that we've had a spate of recently, especially in films featuring actors such as Adam Driver. But it does that and still peddles this wonderful idea of feminism, these wonderful contrasting ideas of feminism, like we said before, this intergenerational feminism that we don't really get to see on screen. And I just think it's wonderful. I think it's a very comforting watch. Like I said, I often turn to it sort of in times of need, and I always feel better having watched it. It's so warm. The tenderness really does seep through this film, and it holds a really special place in my heart, and it's probably it's definitely up there with my A24 favourites, and it's wonderful. And I would urge anyone to see it, especially if you're fans of the actors in this film. I know there's a lot of Fanning fans out there. There's a lot of Gerwig fans. And I know Gerwig fans more often than not turn to Lady Bird or Frances Ha, but if they've not seen 20th Century Women, or if you're interested in Gerwig and you haven't yet seen 20th Century Women, I can't recommend it enough. So yeah, I think those are my final thoughts on it. It's a wonderful film, and like I said, it's incredibly comforting, and it always seems to be there when you need it in the right time.
You mentioned sort of at the top of the show some of your radio shows where people can find your writing, and we'll have obviously that in the show notes that people can find. But if people wanted to reach out to you on Twitter or anything like that, where's the best place to kind of find you and interact with you?
Yeah, the best place to sort of have discussion with me would probably be on Twitter, and my @ is @_Hannah Ryan. It's pretty simple. I'm always on there. I'm always kind of tweeting movie thoughts or just general sort of inane words. But yeah, I'd love to have interactions on there. My DMs are always open. I'm always up for discussion. And I'm especially always up for discussion of Gerwig, of 20th Century Women, and everyone involved in it.
Well, hopefully this isn't going to be the last time we get you on. I'd love to have you on again in the future. And yeah, we've got 2 podcasts, so we can have a Gerwig episode and we can get you on in future to discuss some other work. But honestly, it's been a real pleasure to have you on today, Hannah. So one of the things that I also love about this film is this soundtrack. What did you make of the use of music in this film, Dallas?
Yeah, no, I really like the soundtrack, and I thought it was, again, sort of using songs to really sort of drive home the period of the film and the sort of the feel of it, and also how some of the musical choices will sort of move the story forward and change as he's introduced to new things and new ideas through the characters as well. And I thought it's touching upon, just as well as sort of Tarantino uses music in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood to set the scene and the time and the period. I thought Mike Mills did as good a job as Cameron Crowe does in Almost Famous as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that I love about some of these songs have kind of stayed on my music playlist for a little while now as well, and yeah, I just think it's such a great period of time, and yeah, definitely one of the best soundtracks of A24 films. But like, this film has also become incredibly popular out of kind of A24 films, certainly with the hipster crowd in particular, and sort of, as you discussed, the A24 hive. Why do you think, sort of coming to it a bit late, what is it you're fresh in the door, what is it about this film that's maybe struck a certain crowd and audience?
I don't know, I think it's just, it can't be as simple as it's got Greta Gerwig in it, because as you say, Greta Gerwig wasn't really part of the A24 hive, as we call them, and until sort of around about Lady Bird sort of time. I think it was just I think people have maybe come to this one sort of maybe following on from Moonlight and stuff like that, and have maybe found it and experienced it through that way, and realised that this is only a couple of episodes on from Moonlight, and sort of really seen the high bar of quality that A24 were hitting at that point. And like I say, this is sort of 3 really strong female characters in it, and that's something great. And I think, like you say, you made the point of it's his story, but like you say, he's paying tribute and celebrating these women in the way that he's written it. He's not denigrating them or driving them down in any particular way. They're all shown to be strong, capable women, and I think that's something to be, certainly in the sort of years that have followed on from the film, I think it's something that should be shouted and celebrated given the time that we're in just now. I think it's a really positive example of filmmaking and also storytelling, and also, yeah.
I think one thing that I'm curious to talk about with this film as well, sort of as a final point on it, is that this film was produced by Annapurna and distributed by A24, exactly similar to Spring Breakers. And I suppose this is an opportunity to discuss the current state of Annapurna as they find themselves facing sort of bankruptcy at the moment. What's your kind of state? Obviously this is the A24 project, but a bit of a crossover here. What's your thoughts on the current state of play with Annapurna?
Well, we did do an episode of the Filibuster podcast called the Annapurna Project, where we talked about our top Annapurna films, and at that point I would have completely changed it by now because of the films which I've seen. I would have definitely put 20th Century Women in there, Booksmart, and If Beale Street Could Talk. And it is a shame that this is happening because they are a company that are producing original filmmaking, and it would be sad to see them go bankrupt, and we live in a world where essentially there is only Disney doing all the mainstream blockbuster ones and trying to cannibalize any successful project from any other film, as Sony will tell you just now. And it would only be A24 sort of fighting the good fight of providing the sort of original low budget independent films to go up against them. It'd be like Disney own blockbuster season and A24 will then own Oscar season. I think I actually did a meme of something very similar where it was basically cinema exhibition and distribution deals in 2019, and it was Thanos and Captain America from Infinity War, and Thanos was Disney and Captain America was A24, and Disney have that really sort of puzzled look on their face about why someone is standing up to them in terms of that. And I think it's just a shame that all the films for some reason or another just haven't connected this year, because they've been good films, sort of Vice, Booksmart and stuff. They haven't, I think, of course the current one is Where'd You Go, Bernadette, which we haven't seen yet, but you would have thought with the names behind there it would have found an audience. I guess, is it something to do with the streaming argument where people are only going to the cinema now to watch these big family blockbusters that they know are going to play well on the big screen, and they're saving everything for streaming services? I don't know, but it would be a shame given the way that the competition is going in the cinema at the moment, that if we were to lose someone like this who can sort of fight the good fight, especially now that we're looking at a situation where Fox Searchlight may be on the way out as well, since Disney apparently are feeling a bit anxious about what people are going to make of Jojo Rabbit.
Yeah, I think it's frustrating, but I think as we sort of discussed it in sort of our other podcasts, and we'll put the link in the show notes if you're interested. And what I think is that they've made some sort of silly investments as well. I think they'd spent sort of about 30 odd million on the rights for something like Sisters Brothers, which I really enjoyed as a film, but is that a wise investment when you think of like the cost and the audience for a film like that? It hasn't really worked out, and there's been a kind of few films like that. There's been, for all the best intent in the world, what Megan Ellison's doing, investing in great filmmakers, just going, here's a blank check. Maybe sort of the A24 models just worked that a little bit better. It's certainly not without its flaws, but it's sort of kept everything on a bit of a more even keel. And I think Megan Ellison and her family are so rich. I think the dad is going to pay off some of that debt, and Annapurna will continue. I mean, it's got James Bond on the horizon, but I think they've made perhaps some ill-advised investments, or perhaps over-investments, and it's kind of come back to bite them on the thing. But something like this, it shows that when they worked with A24, between this and Spring Breakers, these are two of the most popular films in the A24 filmography, and Annapurna deserve a lot of respect for sort of investing in those films.
Absolutely. I think, I'm just looking at sort of the Wikipedia list of all the films and stuff like that, they've got a few sort of big sort of production ones, but they also do a lot of co-producing, and perhaps we might see them go down the model in the future of maybe acting more as a sort of exhibitor distributor, so sort of picking up films once they're already made, rather than say, taking the financial risk of producing them and investing so much money in them. So I think we might see them more sort of become a big player at the sort of Sundance festivals and Cannes and stuff like that, picking up films that they know they'll be able to market well and get out, because there is still an audience for these films. It's just perhaps a shrinking audience, so they need to fight their battles well and pick their projects perhaps a little better in the future.
Perhaps, and thinking about maybe picking projects a little bit better, we come now to Trespass Against Us. So, living on the outskirts of Gloucestershire in England, 3 generations of the Cutlers, the infamously famous family of professional criminals, spend their time planning their next heist and mocking the police. Under Colby's wing, the family's patriarch, the one who pulls all the strings and the sources of all the evil within the family, and Chad, the eldest son, who finds himself wavering from his desire to live a quiet life with his wife and son, away from crime, but is fearfully respectful of his father. When Colby devises a plan targeting Lord Lieutenant's private collection of art, the police will come after them hard, and a life of bad decisions, violence and crime will begin to collapse. So Dallas, this was one you mentioned you'd seen as well for the first time. What was your expectation going into this film, and what was your initial reaction?
I mean, I remember seeing the trailer for it, and I was aware of the film, but it was one that I just, for some reason or other, just didn't hook me in enough to merit a cinema visit. And then it was one which just sort of was, I think it was on my Netflix list for a while, but then dropped off because of other things as well. So I eventually got around to it now. And yeah, it has some merits, but I mean, for me, sort of living in the UK and stuff like this film, and I mean, even without sort of seeing the credits, I could sort of tell that this film was a Film 4 type of film, and indeed it was produced by Film 4 and the BFI. It felt very much of a British sort of film, and it was, like you say, an interesting choice for A24 to take across the pond and release in the States, because it is very much of its sort of time and place. And so I'd be interested to read now, sort of seeing what American reviews and stuff for it were like, because it's definitely got a place. And for anyone who's grown up in the UK and stuff and seen sort of news reports and documentaries on the sort of travellers and travelling lifestyle, you can see a lot of that in it, and it sort of goes certainly down ways I expect, but also thankfully it goes and makes some interesting narrative choices as well. So what about yourself? What was your first introduction to this one?
Yeah, this was one I'd been sort of similar to maybe how you were with 20th Century Women. I just had this one kind of lined up to watch when we got round to this one, and I love Michael Fassbender, and I kept thinking, like, wonder why this one sort of passed me by. And I kind of knew it was a sort of a crime film, and like the poster on iTunes, it's like a close-up of Michael Fassbender, yellow background, holding a gun. It looks badass. You wouldn't think it was sort of about like a travelling community or set in like the middle of England. So you're sort of like, it's a sort of deceptive poster. I don't know if you found that with how you watched it, or how it's advertised on DVD. It kind of looks like, oh, this is going to be like some big action film. And then it sort of was like, right, here we go, it's coming up soon. I'll have a wee look at IMDb. You know, the cast features, as we said, Michael Fassbender, Barry Keoghan, who will return in Killing of a Sacred Deer and the upcoming Green Knight. We've got Rory Kinnear and Brendan Gleeson. That's like a great cast.
Of course, don't forget one of the most sinister men in films, Sean Harris as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah, so like, it's got a great cast, and you think, why is this one sort of passing by? And sometimes when I tune into sort of an A24 film and I see the DirecTV logo pop up at the start, sometimes that can be like, that's something to, you pause. The quality can be hit or miss with those films. So I kind of gave it a shot, and it just didn't engage me. I couldn't get over sort of the accents. In the beginning I thought it was like meant to be Irish, and then I realised it was meant to be some sort of English kind of Gloucestershire accent. It was just doesn't sort of work for kind of a heist film for me.
Was it meant to be? It wasn't meant to be Irish? That's interesting.
I think it's meant to be English.
Okay, well, I just assumed that they were kind of Irish, to be honest, because of Fassbender and Gleeson both being Irish, and kind of, the Irish twang sort of maybe inadvertently sort of dropping in every now and again when the two of them especially were shouting at them. I guess they had a case of Gerard Butler and 300 syndrome and Ewan McGregor in Revenge of the Sith, that whenever if you're Irish or Scottish and you shout, basically your natural accent will shine through. So maybe that was not made entirely clear to me watching the film about where they were meant to be from.
That could be typically classy of kind of Michael Fassbender, that and no matter what accent he does in the world, whether it's German, Irish, British, that Irish one always breaks through in the end. It's I always think of it at the end of X-Men First Class, when it just broke out.
He's
like
the
that.
modern day Sean Connery.
Yeah. The film also had me wondering, like, what attracted A24 to this film? Like, they acquired the US rights to this film on the 16th of December 2014, an early Christmas present perhaps for themselves, but it was like several months after kind of shooting had ended, and the film wasn't released in the US until late November 2016. Why would A24, this typically American kind of company that's most of their stories, very, very few of them make it globally, why do you think they picked up this film?
I'm thinking maybe perhaps it was just the Fassbender thing. So I think what you're saying, sort of 2014, so sort of Shame would have been out by that point, and you would have done Eden Lake. You're looking at sort of Frank, Slow West, of course, as well, Macbeth, Steve Jobs. So he was actually on a bit of a run at that point in terms of critical acclaim in those films, and then he had the presence, wide screen with the X-Men films as well. So perhaps they were thinking he'd bring a new sort of audience in to A24 films, but I think you look at the storyline and the setting, and it doesn't scream A24. I mean, at times I thought that I didn't know if this was like an honest or stereotypical view of traveller life, because if you see the sort of news reports and any sort of documentaries on like the Channel 4 and whatever, it does seem like almost at times of a parody of that kind of world, and to the point where at times it felt like I was watching a new version of Snatch. Do you like dags? Yeah, I like dogs. Yeah, it's just like, is this like a full-length feature version of Brad Pitt's little sort of caravan of pikeys and stuff like that? So.
Yeah, what did you think of the accents? Could you take it seriously, or did it take you out of the film?
At times, it did take me out of the film a little bit, I have to be honest. And again, I think part of it was just due to the sort of slightly muddled origin of them and not being able to work out where exactly they were from, and so it did take me out. I did find it quite distracting at times, I think.
Yeah, and what did you make of some of the we talked about this like heist movie, there going to be some action. What did you make of the inverted commas action scenes?
It was just a lot of driving around in like a Ford Escort around some fields, wasn't it, really? I mean, in terms of I would never really saw this as an action film. I think the posters and sort of trailers and stuff that I saw, it was sort of the image of sort of a shirtless Michael Fassbender getting sort of handcuffed and stuff like that. So in some ways, I guess that would appeal to a certain audience. So I'd never seen this yellow poster of him sort of holding the gun and stuff like that. So I'd never really was expecting a huge action film, but I certainly felt that for a long time it was heading to a sort of explosive conclusion of a film where the son and the father are at odds, and is sort of building up to a showdown between the two of them. And I have to say, I'm kind of surprised but glad that it went the way it did, because I was kind of, like you say, disengaged with the entire film, but it did kind of manage to draw me in for like the sort of the last 15 minutes with the decisions that the Fassbender's character decides to make at the end.
Yeah, what did you make of sort of one of the big climax of the film involves stealing a dog? What did you make of that?
Yeah, you didn't expect that to be the sort of the thing that lit the spark of the fuse that led to the ending. But a lot of this was this thing where he was wanting to escape his father and his father's sort of hold over him, and then I sort of like the way that he decides. It's a point where he's basically taken into his kid's school with his wife and basically told that the kid's not allowed to be in there anymore because of the trouble that the family are in. And basically he makes this decision. Apologies if you have not watched Trespass Against Us yet, but I'm going to kind of talk about the ending now. He makes the decision to basically get arrested and go to jail in order to get out of his son's life, to allow his son to have an upbringing where he's not going to be constantly in the idea of getting into trouble, going into jail, getting a criminal record. He's going to give his son the chance that he never had growing up with his dad. So it's an interesting and noble sacrifice, and I'm glad that it went down that way rather than him sort of beating up his dad and basically taking the kids and the wife and walking away from that kind of life. I'd like that he made that sort of grown-up decision to go down a different route and a different path to that of his father.
Yeah, and I like that sort of, that last third. It's all about him. There's like, he wants his son to just have a good time and be settled at school, and they have sort of the ambitions that most parents have, and sort of despite their different lifestyle to us. And yeah, I thought it was nice, but I think it's one of these ones that, like, as you mentioned, if this was sort of on Film 4 or something like that and you were a bit hungover, you wouldn't mind watching a film like this. But I think ultimately it's just sort of becomes a little bit undone because it's like, oh, it's an A24 film, surely it could be a little bit better than this, or there's more confusion about why this is sort of in there in the filmography. But yeah, that's the way it goes. Sometimes we've watched perhaps much worse than this.
Oh yeah, no, I've definitely watched worse than this on this project so far, and I'm sure I will watch a lot better films as well. But it's one of, you can chalk it up as one of the more interesting choices for A24 because you can't really see where it fits in the US market where they distribute primarily. So it was an interesting choice, but one that probably didn't work out ultimately for them in terms of box office and prestige.
Dallas, we'll be back again in 2 weeks to discuss The Black Coat's Daughter and Free Fire, and we'll also have a Ben Wheatley interview in that episode as well, so a good 15 minutes with the man himself talking about, it's a bit of an older interview that I carried out when this film was released, so we'll be able to put that in as a bit of a bonus. But we'll be back again as a show next week when we'll have Patricia Rosema talking about her career and Into the Forest. So Dallas, if people wanted to try and shake you and find, because you've not watched 20th Century Women until now, where can people find you? You
can come
online?
and chastise me at champcelluloid on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo. So definitely I'm looking forward to chatting about those two movies in a few weeks' time. They're a pretty diverse double bill. So thanks to everyone for listening as always. It's greatly appreciated, and we'll speak with you soon. Bye.